Hi, I'm Christine. You won't believe what happened at our family barbecue. My father-in-law mocked my entire family, and to make matters worse, his grandson spit in my plate and said, "Dad says you deserve it." How could they do this to me? For years, I've stayed quiet, taking their disrespect but not anymore. What led to this betrayal? And what happens next? Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens after this shocking moment. The late afternoon sun hung low over the suburban backyard, casting a golden glow over the scattered plastic chairs and the worn-out picnic table. The air was warm, tinged with the smell of grilled burgers and the faint crackle of a distant lawnmower. I stood on the porch, watching my father-in-law, Victor, flip burgers like the patriarch of this little world, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and a few friends. Their laughter mixed with the sizzle of the grill, a scene that should have felt familiar, but instead, I felt like a ghost hovering at the edge of their merriment. I had always tried to blend in, to be part of this family, to find my place in their world, but today, something felt different. Something in the way they all spoke, the way they laughed at jokes that weren't funny, the way they ignored me. Was it me, or had I really become invisible to them? Victor was holding court, as usual, his booming voice carrying effortlessly across the yard. His laugh, loud and patronizing, filled the spaces between the jokes, and my husband, Alex, was nowhere to be found. He'd wandered off long ago, glued to his phone, lost in whatever distraction seemed to matter more than being here. And then there was Jenna, my sister-in-law, always smiling that smug smile, as if she knew something the rest of us didn't. She barely glanced my way as she chatted with the others, her words light, almost mocking, but delivered with a practiced sweetness. Caleb, my 10-year-old nephew, ran around, oblivious to the tension in the air, his wild laughter carrying an edge of entitlement that stung. I stood there, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, trying to find something, anything, to latch onto. This was supposed to be a family gathering, a time for connection. But it felt like a performance, a show where I was an extra, fading into the background. And the worst part? No one seemed to notice. As I sipped my drink, I overheard Victor make one of his usual offhand comments, the kind that got without really cutting, a comment that somehow made everyone laugh but also left a bitter taste in my mouth. You know, the real success stories aren't always the loudest ones, but they sure know their place, he said, glancing over at me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I froze. The words hung in the air, suspended like an invisible slap to the face. I knew he wasn't talking directly to me, but it didn't matter. It never did. His words were always carefully disguised, like a slow poison that seeped in over time. But today, they stung more than usual. I looked around. No one reacted. Alex was still engrossed in his phone. Jenna smirked, her eyes flicking toward me briefly, then back to her own conversation. Caleb, blissfully unaware, ran past, chasing a stray ball across the yard. And just like that, I realized something that had been growing in the back of my mind for years. This family, my family, had always been like this. They had never been on my side. Not really. I was just there, a pawn in a game I never asked to play. It was then that I felt it, the weight of my own silence pressing down on me. For years, I'd swallowed my feelings, played along with their jokes, their barbs, their constant disregard for me. I had convinced myself that if I stayed quiet long enough, they'd eventually see me. But today, I could feel something inside me snapping. Something had to change. As I stood there, trying to steady my breath, I watched Victor, my father-in-law, the man who had somehow earned everyone's respect without ever earning mine, continue to make his jokes. The laughter that followed felt like a mockery. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, and the tension in the air thickened. It was supposed to be a family barbecue, a day of relaxation and enjoyment. But as I stood there, isolated and invisible, I felt the overwhelming weight of years of being overlooked, dismissed, and mocked. My thoughts were interrupted by Caleb, who came running up to me, a mischievous grin on his face. I was about to ask him where his parents were when he stopped in front of me, unprovoked. Without any warning, he leaned forward and spat into my plate, the small splatter of food and saliva shocking me into silence. His words followed quickly, almost like an afterthought. Dad says you deserve it. The world seemed to tilt for a second. I stared at the plate in disbelief, my hands trembling, the bile of frustration rising in my throat. The moment felt surreal. I wanted to shout, to confront him, to ask how it was possible for my own family to treat me like this. But instead, I stayed frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just the spit. It was the endorsement, the approval of everything that had been said and done to me over the years. It was the confirmation that I was nothing more than a target for their jokes, their criticisms, their cruelty. The laughter from the other side of the yard continued as if nothing had happened. No one looked up. No one even cared. And that's when I realized something else. I was done. I was done pretending to be invisible. I was done letting them define who I was, letting them dictate my worth with their jokes and their cold, condescending attitudes. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping across the floor, and for the first time in years, I didn't care if anyone noticed. I didn't look back. I walked out, barefoot, the cool concrete under my feet a sharp contrast to the heat still radiating from the grill. It was a feeling I hadn't had in years. A feeling of power, of control, of self-respect. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the empty streets as I drove home. The summer night felt cold in contrast to the heat of the day, as if the universe was reminding me that the warmth I'd hoped for was never truly there. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, as the events of the barbecue replayed in my mind like a never-ending loop. I had tried to remain calm, tried to pretend that the sting of Victor's words, Caleb's disrespect, and my family's indifference didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than I was willing to admit. I had always tried to make peace, to play the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law, the quiet one who just went along with everything. But something inside me snapped tonight. The weight of the years of silence, of tolerating the mockery, the neglect, it had all hit me in a way I couldn't ignore. The quiet hum of the car was almost soothing, but it couldn't drown out the storm inside my chest. I was angry. I was hurt. And for the first time, I didn't want to hold it in anymore. I had been silent for so long, too afraid to stand up for myself, too willing to sacrifice my own happiness to keep the peace. But that was over now. I had reached my breaking point. The spit in my plate, the condescending words from Victor, Caleb's nasty little taunt, it was all too much. Why have I been letting them treat me like this? I muttered under my breath, my hands still shaking as I gripped the wheel. They've never seen the real me. Never cared. But I'll show them now. The tears that had been building behind my eyes threatened to spill over, but I didn't let them. Not now. Not when I was so close to making a decision that would change everything. For years, I had let their words and actions define me. I had let them control how I saw myself, how I felt about my place in the family. But not anymore. The drive felt endless, the silence in the car stretching between me and the world I was leaving behind. I had spent so much of my life pretending. Pretending that I didn't care about the insults. Pretending that I didn't notice when I was excluded. Pretending that I didn't feel the sting of rejection every time I was ignored or dismissed. But now, I didn't have to pretend anymore. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't go back to that. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a family that didn't even see me. My heart was racing, my mind running a mile a minute, but deep down, I knew this was the right decision. I turned off the car, sitting in the parking lot for a moment before opening the door. The cool night air hit me like a wave, grounding me in the present. As I walked to my apartment, the weight on my chest began to ease. The anger was still there, but now it felt different. It wasn't just anger, it was power. Power that came from finally realizing my worth. The door to my apartment clicked open, and I stepped inside, leaving my shoes by the door. My apartment was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the barbecue, but it was a kind of peace that I hadn't known in years. I dropped my keys on the counter and went straight to the living room, sitting down on the couch. The darkness of the room was comforting, like a blanket that wrapped around me, offering a space where I could breathe and think clearly. It was then that I truly let it all sink in, the realization that I had spent so many years thinking I needed to belong, thinking I needed to please them, when all along, they had never truly cared about me. The humiliation I had felt at the barbecue wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a reflection of everything I had endured in silence. It was the culmination of years of being treated like an outsider, despite being part of the family. I had let them use me, let them treat me like I was nothing. They saw me as nothing more than a tool, someone to cater to their needs, to play the part they expected me to play. But I wasn't a tool. I wasn't a doormat. I was a person. I deserved more than this. Sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I felt the full weight of what I was about to do. It wasn't just about leaving the barbecue. It wasn't just about walking away from a toxic moment. This was about reclaiming my life, my voice, and my peace. It was about taking back the power I had given away for far too long. I stood up slowly, my legs still shaky from the adrenaline that had been coursing through me all night. I walked over to my desk, sat down, and grabbed my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I typed out a text to my mother, the words feeling heavy yet necessary. I'm cutting ties with the family. I can't do this anymore. I deserve more than this. I had sent before I could second guess myself, then set the phone down on the table. The buzzing from the phone was almost deafening, but I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I needed this. I needed to feel the power of walking away, of finally taking control of my life. The phone buzzed again, then again. Each time, my heart skipped, but I stayed calm. This was it. This was my moment of defiance. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let anyone change that. As I stood there, looking at my phone, the weight of what I had done settled in. The family would try to reach out, try to guilt me back into their lives, but I didn't care anymore. I had made my choice. I was no longer their doormat. I was done. The phone buzzed one last time, but I didn't pick it up. I didn't care. I stood there, my phone still buzzing, but I didn't care anymore. I had made my decision. They would either learn to respect me or lose me forever. The morning light filtered through my apartment windows, casting soft shadows across the room. The sun was still low in the sky, but I could already feel the weight of the day ahead. I hadn't slept well, the images from last night still too fresh, too raw. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, an unrelenting reminder of the chaos I had left behind. It was my mother, again. Her name lit up the screen, and for a moment, I debated whether to pick up. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the buzzing phone, hands trembling as my mind raced. I had just spent the entire night lying in bed, replaying the events from the barbecue, each moment more humiliating than the last. The way Victor mocked me. The way Caleb spit into my plate like I was nothing. And the worst part, my family, my own flesh and blood, did nothing. They stood there, passive, as if this was just another day. Another reminder that I didn't belong. I had been quiet for too long. Always taking the hits, always staying silent, always pretending it didn't bother me. I told myself I had to. I told myself it was just easier to keep the peace, to let things slide. But last night, the silence broke. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not after Caleb's little stunt. Not after Victor's casual cruelty. Something inside me snapped. Not anymore, I muttered to myself as I picked up my phone, swiping through the messages from my family. My mom had sent me several, each one more insistent than the last, begging me to come back, to forgive them, to let go of the anger. They couldn't even see it. Couldn't even understand why I was angry. It wasn't about the barbecue. It was about years of emotional neglect, years of being treated like I was invisible. They think I'll just fall back into their manipulations, I thought, shaking my head. But I won't. I can't. Not anymore. The emotional roller coaster was exhausting. I felt angry, hurt, betrayed. But beneath it all was a strange sense of empowerment, like a new kind of strength was slowly starting to rise within me. I had been living my life in a cage, always bending over backward for people who never truly saw me. And now, for the first time, I realized that I didn't have to keep doing that. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I took a deep breath and stared out the window, watching the morning sun glint off the buildings outside. The world felt still, almost surreal, as if I was in some kind of limbo. But then I realized, this wasn't limbo. This was my life. And I had to make a choice. A choice to stop being the silent martyr. A choice to take back my life. I reached for my phone again. This time, I wasn't scrolling mindlessly. I opened my messages, stared at the words from my family, and for the first time, I felt no obligation to respond. No guilt. Just clarity. I was done. Done being their caretaker, their fixer, their punching bag. It was time for me to take control of my own life. The realization hit hard, like a punch to the gut. For years, I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own well-being, just to make sure everyone else was okay. I'd kept everything together, always putting my family's needs ahead of my own. But they had never asked how I felt. Never cared about my struggles. Now, I was going to take a step back. Not for revenge, but for myself. I stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. My hands were steady as I began to write. I started slow, the words coming more easily than I expected. I wrote about the hurt, the betrayal, the years of silence that had built up like a dam ready to break. And then, I wrote about what I needed, what I deserved. Respect. Acknowledgement. Peace. The letter wasn't harsh, but it was firm. It wasn't accusatory, but it was a declaration. A declaration that I would no longer stand by and allow my family to treat me like I was nothing. I wasn't going to beg for their love or their attention anymore. I was done. I had sinned, and just like that, the weight of silence lifted. I felt lighter. More at peace. The first step had been taken. But as the seconds ticked by, the reality of what I'd done began to settle in. What would they say? How would they react? My heart raced as my phone buzzed in my hand. I stared at the screen, almost afraid to look, but I knew I had to. The message from my mother read, "Don't contact us again." The coldness of her words stung, but there was something freeing about them. A finality that I hadn't expected, but needed. They had made their decision, and I had made mine. I let the phone buzz one more time before I turned it off. This was it. There was no going back. I was done. And for the first time in years, I felt the freedom I had been searching for. I woke up early the next morning, the light creeping through my blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. The air in my apartment felt heavy, like something was about to break. My mind was still reeling from the events of the past few days. The letter I sent, the calls from my family, the guilt they tried to impose on me, it was all too much. I thought I would feel a sense of relief after sending the letter, but now, I was starting to realize how deep the wound was. The manipulation, the guilt trips, the way they always expected me to be the one to fix everything, it all hit me with full force. The phone rang. My heart skipped when I saw the name on the screen. It was my father. I had expected this, but I still wasn't ready. I let the phone ring for a few moments before reluctantly answering it. His voice was warm, too warm. Like he thought everything could just be smoothed over with a few nice words. "Eliza, sweetheart," he said, his voice almost too sweet. "I know things have been difficult, but family is family. You have to let go of the past. You can't keep holding on to old hurts." The words stung, and I could feel the familiar knot in my stomach tightening. I had spent years hearing this, years trying to convince myself that if I just kept quiet, kept the peace, it would all somehow get better. But deep down, I knew it never would. I wasn't allowed to feel, to be angry, to have a voice. I was supposed to play the part of the good daughter, the forgiving one, no matter how much it hurt. His voice continued, and I felt the pressure building in my chest. "You're making this worse than it has to be. We all need to move on, Eliza. You're not a child anymore. Stop punishing us." "Stop punishing you?" I repeated, my voice trembling before I could control it. "I'm not punishing anyone, Dad. I'm just trying to live my life. Why can't you see that?" He let out a deep sigh, clearly annoyed. "This isn't about you being right, Eliza. It's about family sticking together, even when things get tough." I could feel the manipulation in his words. I knew the script too well. But this time, something inside me clicked. I wasn't going to play along. Not anymore. "I've been trying for years to be the good daughter, to fix everything, to keep the peace," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I've never been heard. Never been seen. I'm done being the invisible one." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him trying to figure out how to respond. Then, his voice came back, colder now. "You're making a mistake, Eliza. You'll regret this." I hung up. I didn't want to hear any more. I didn't want to be talked down to or manipulated. I was done. But even as I stood there, phone in hand, a sense of unease washed over me. I knew my father wasn't going to stop. He would try again, and again. The pressure would continue, the guilt would keep coming. I wasn't sure how long I could hold up against it. But I had to try. I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment, heading for the small park I liked to walk to when I needed to think. The air was crisp, the morning quiet. As I sat down on one of the benches, I tried to collect my thoughts. The phone call had shaken me, but it had also solidified my decision. I couldn't go back. I couldn't return to the family that had always made me feel like I was less than. As I sat there, the cool breeze brushing against my face, I began to reflect on everything that had brought me to this point. I'd always been the one to keep the peace, the one who fixed things. But now, I saw it for what it really was, a way for everyone else to stay comfortable while I quietly burned out. I'd been shrinking myself, suppressing my own feelings, my own needs, just to make them happy. But in the end, they never cared about what I needed. The silence had always been easier than the fight. It had always been safer to just keep quiet, to play the role they expected of me. But no more. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. I wasn't going to hide in the shadows. I was done playing the part. I got up from the bench and walked back to my apartment, feeling a new sense of resolve. This was it. I had to stand my ground. For the first time in my life, I was going to choose myself. And I couldn't let anyone make me feel guilty for it. Later that day, the letter from my brother arrived. I had expected it, the same guilt, the same accusations. You're tearing the family apart. You're selfish. You should apologize before it's too late. I felt a rush of anger as I read the words. How could they still not understand? How could they not see that this wasn't about them, it was about me? I wasn't asking for much. I was just asking for respect. I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself. Not now. Not ever. The letter burned in my hands, but I didn't let the emotion overwhelm me. I had been overwhelmed for too long. This time, I was in control. I took a deep breath and started drafting my reply. It wasn't going to be filled with anger or resentment. It wasn't going to be an attack. It was simply the truth. I was done. But before I could finish, my phone buzzed again. It was a call I wasn't expecting. I answered, and for a moment, I froze. The voice on the other end was not who I had anticipated. It was my father. "Why are you doing this?" His voice was strained now, a mix of frustration and confusion. "You're making a mistake. I don't know what you want from us, but you're pushing us away." I took a deep breath, ready to stand my ground. "I'm not pushing anyone away. I'm just standing up for myself." The conversation quickly escalated. I couldn't hold back anymore. I said everything I had been holding inside for years. The frustration, the anger, the resentment, it all came pouring out. "You've never cared about how I felt," I said, my voice shaking. "You never saw me. All you saw was what I could do for you." There was a silence on the other end. And then, the words I had been dreading. "You're selfish. Ungrateful." I felt the anger rise within me, but this time, I didn't back down. Maybe I am. But I'm done pretending that everything is okay. I'm done pretending that I don't matter. The line went quiet again, and then, finally, my father spoke again. But this time, it wasn't what I expected. His words hit me like a blow to the chest. "You think I don't know what you've been through? You think I don't know about your mother?" The shock of his words made my stomach lurch. My mind raced, but I couldn't process the revelation. My father knew something about my mother? I didn't know what to say. But I knew, deep down, this conversation was about to change everything. The evening air felt still, heavy with the silence that had settled in my apartment after the phone call from my father. My hand shook as I set the receiver back on its base, my mind racing, replaying his words over and over. "You're making a mistake. You're pushing us all away." The guilt washed over me in waves, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the decision I had made. I had never felt so torn in my life. But deep down, I knew I could no longer ignore the manipulation, the guilt trips, the expectations. I had allowed myself to be silent for too long, swallowing my emotions and burying my pain just to keep the peace. But silence was no longer an option. If I stayed silent now, I would never be free. I had made my choice, and it was time to face the truth, head on. I stood in the middle of my small living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows around me. It was late, the world outside quiet, but my thoughts were loud. This is my life, I whispered to myself. My choice. The weight of my decision was starting to lift. The guilt was still there, lingering like a cloud, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. I wasn't the one at fault. They were. They had never seen me. They had never truly known me. And it was time they did. The following morning, after a restless night, I found myself standing in the kitchen, making a cup of coffee. I knew today was the day. I had spent hours the night before rehearsing my words, mentally preparing for what was to come. My heart raced just thinking about it. As I poured the hot coffee into my favorite mug, I couldn't help but think about the conversation I would have with my family. I had no idea how they would react. Would they be angry? Would they try to guilt me into taking everything back? Or would they ignore me, as they always had, pretending like nothing had changed? I had no answers, but I was determined to stand firm. This wasn't just about family anymore, this was about reclaiming my life. It was about setting boundaries, speaking the truth, and no longer allowing myself to be pushed aside. The thought of facing them terrified me, but it also excited me. I was ready. The tension I had carried for so long was finally starting to shift. It wasn't just about making a stand against my family. It was about reclaiming the woman I had buried inside for years. The one who was strong enough to speak her mind, to demand respect, and to stop being invisible. As I sat down at the kitchen table, I felt the familiar nerves creeping in. What if they didn't understand? What if they never saw me the way I wanted to be seen? But I knew deep down that I couldn't keep living in fear of their judgment. This was the moment I had been building toward. I put the mug down, took a deep breath, and made my way to the living room. My phone buzzed, but I didn't look at it. I had already prepared myself for whatever they had to say, and now it was time to act. Later that afternoon, the time had come. I stood outside my parents' house, my heart pounding in my chest. I had received the invitation, a family reunion of sorts, arranged by my mother. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was supposed to be a moment of healing, a moment where everything would go back to normal. But I knew that normal was long gone. As I stepped through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. My father, mother, and siblings sat in the living room, their eyes on me as I walked in. I could sense the expectation, the unspoken pressure that they would try to push me back into the role they had always assigned me. But this time, I wasn't going to play along. "Everyone's here," my father said, his voice warm, almost too warm. "I'm glad you came." I took a deep breath, my pulse quickening. "I came because we need to talk." There was a brief silence before my father responded, his voice sounding slightly defensive. "Of course. We've all been through a lot. It's time to move forward, Eliza." I shook my head. "No, it's not time to move forward. Not until we face the truth." My father's face tightened. "What do you mean by that?" I looked around the room at my family. My mother, sitting quietly, her face unreadable. My siblings, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I felt their eyes on me, but I didn't look away. "For years," I began, my voice calm but firm, "I've been the one who kept everything together. I've been the one who tried to keep the peace, who fixed things, who did everything I could to make everyone happy. But you never once asked how I felt." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. This was my moment. "I'm not here to beg for your approval anymore. I'm not here to play the role of the good daughter who puts everyone else first. I've spent my whole life waiting for you to see me, but I've been invisible. I've been the fixer, not the person. And I'm done with it." The room fell silent. My father looked at me, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think this is all about you? You think you're the only one who's suffered?" "I never said that," I shot back. "But you've never once asked me how I felt. You've never cared to know. And I've been carrying the weight of that for years." My brother suddenly walked into the room, interrupting the tension. "Eliza, you need to hear this." He stood there for a moment, his face conflicted, and then he dropped the bombshell. "You think you're the only one? You think you're the only one who's been manipulated, Who's been lied to? All of us have. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My family wasn't just dysfunctional. They were all part of the lie. The manipulations, the betrayals, the secrets, it was all part of the same toxic cycle I had been trying to escape. My father and mother reacted defensively, trying to minimize the truth. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I stood there, my heart racing, my hands shaking, but I didn't move. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I saw the truth for what it was. And I wasn't going to let them hide behind their lies any longer. I'm not going to be a part of this anymore, I said, my voice steady. I won't be silenced. Not anymore. The room was thick with tension, the weight of the truth hanging heavy in the air. My family might have been trying to hold on to their illusions, but I was done. The quiet park bench was my refuge. A place to sit, to think, and to let the weight of my decision settle. The trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, but my mind was anything but calm. Yesterday's confrontation with my family was still fresh in my thoughts, the words we exchanged still echoing in my ears. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The guilt, the resentment, and the anger, they all mixed into a potent cocktail that I had to face head on. I stared out at the empty path ahead of me, my heart still heavy with the aftermath. But for the first time, a sense of clarity had started to form. This was it. There was no going back. My family had spent years manipulating me, expecting me to keep quiet, to fit into the mold they had created for me. No more. The decision wasn't easy. I had spent years trying to be the good daughter, the one who held the family together, trying to avoid conflict. But at what cost? I had allowed myself to be silenced, to be unseen. I was tired of being everyone's emotional punching bag. They never saw me, never asked me how I felt, and now, I was done. I don't need their validation, I whispered to myself, as the cool morning air hit my face. I need my own peace. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. The guilt was still there, lingering in the back of my mind. What if they never understood? What if I really was selfish? But deep down, I knew that if I stayed silent now, I would never be free. It was time to let go. It was time to take control of my own life. The sound of my phone vibrating in my pocket broke through my thoughts. It was a text from my mother, asking if we could talk. I let it sit and answered, choosing instead to reflect on the decision I had made. I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep going back to the same toxic cycle of silence and manipulation. The sun began to rise higher in the sky, but I remained seated, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, yet also the weight lifting with each passing second. I had made a choice, and now, there was no turning back. That evening, my family arrived uninvited, just as I had expected. My apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in as they walked through the door. My father, mother, and siblings stood in front of me, their faces a mixture of anger, confusion, and disbelief. They didn't understand. They never did. "Eliza," my father began, his voice tinged with frustration, "you've made a huge mistake. Family is family. You can't just walk away from us." I stayed silent, letting his words hang in the air. For so many years, I had listened to their accusations, their demands. But not this time. I wasn't going to let them guilt trip me into silence again. "You think I'm selfish, don't you?" I finally spoke, my voice calm but firm. "You think I'm ungrateful for everything you've done for me. But you've never once stopped to think about what I need. All these years, I've been the one holding everything together, and yet none of you ever asked how I felt." My father's eyes narrowed, his face reddening with anger. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Eliza. You're tearing this family apart." I stood up slowly, my chest tightening with frustration. "You know what? Maybe I am. Maybe I'm tearing apart the illusion you've all created. But I'm done pretending. I'm done trying to fix things that were never meant to be fixed." The room fell silent as my words hung in the air. My brother shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't look away. I wasn't going to apologize, not anymore. They all looked at me with a mix of disbelief and anger, but I didn't flinch. This was my moment. I was no longer afraid of their manipulation. "I'm not going to play along with this anymore," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "If you can't respect my boundaries, then you don't get to be a part of my life. Not anymore. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I'm done with your guilt trips, your manipulation, and your lies. I don't need you to approve of me anymore. I don't need your approval, period. I stood there, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. It was the first time in years I had felt in control. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reclaiming my life. As my family stood in stunned silence, I felt the shift in the air. I wasn't the same person I had been just a few months ago. I was no longer the one who kept quiet, who tried to please everyone. I was standing up for myself, and that was the only victory I needed. Later that evening, after my family had left, I sat alone in my apartment, the silence settling in around me. I couldn't deny the pang of sadness that came with severing ties with my family. There was a part of me that still longed for their acceptance, for the love I had never received. But I had made my choice, and there was no turning back now. I picked up my phone and saw a message from my brother. His words were apologetic, but there was an underlying tone of confusion. He didn't fully understand why I had done what I did, but he was sorry nonetheless. I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions swirling inside me. I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice, but I knew it was the only choice I could make. I had to protect myself. I had to stop letting my family dictate my happiness. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom. It was the beginning of something new, something I couldn't yet name, but something I knew I needed. The evening was unusually cold for a family gathering, as I stood outside the grand, empty family estate, staring at the front door. This house, this once familiar place, felt foreign now. The coldness wasn't just from the weather, it was the tension that filled the air, like a thick fog that threatened to choke the life out of everything. A week had passed since my last confrontation with my family. A week since I'd finally felt like I had taken control of my life. And now, here I was, preparing for the final confrontation. I could already hear the voices inside, the family, waiting for me. My father's voice would be the loudest, accusing, demanding. But this time, I was ready. I had already made up my mind, and there was nothing they could say to make me doubt myself. As I walked inside, the familiar faces of my father and brother stared at me with judgment, as if I was the one who had wronged them. "Eliza, you've really done it this time," my father began, his voice thick with disappointment. "You've torn this family apart with your selfishness." I stood still, letting his words hit me. It wasn't the first time I'd heard them, but it was the first time they didn't break me. "I didn't tear anything apart," I said, my voice calm. "You've been tearing us apart for years. I'm just the one who's finally stepping away." My brother, who had been quiet until now, jumped in. "You're being dramatic, Eliza. You're overreacting. You can't just cut ties with us over one argument." One argument. That's what they thought this was. One argument. But it wasn't. It was a lifetime of manipulation, of being made to feel small, invisible. "I've been silent for far too long," I said, stepping further into the room, my voice stronger now. "And I've had enough. I'm not going to play your games anymore." My father's face turned red with anger. "You think you can just walk away? You're the one who's destroying this family. You'll regret this." "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I won't regret standing up for myself. I'm done being your emotional punching bag. I'm done trying to fix things that are broken beyond repair." The silence that followed was deafening. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I refused to back down. "I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself," I continued, my voice steady. "If you can't accept that, then maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways." My father's lips curled into a snarl. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll regret this when you're alone." I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. Alone was better than being manipulated. Alone meant peace. Alone meant freedom. For the first time in my life, I felt a surge of power. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't afraid of anyone. "You know what?" I said, turning to face them both. "I'm done trying to make you understand. I'm done begging for your approval. I don't need your love if it comes at the cost of my dignity." I turned to leave, but my brother stepped forward, his anger palpable. "You think you're so much better than us now, don't you?" I paused, looking him in the eye. "No. I don't think I'm better than you. I think I'm better than the person I used to be, the one who kept quiet, the one who let you walk all over her." My father and brother stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and rage. For a moment, I wondered if they would ever understand. But I knew that even if they didn't, it didn't matter anymore. I had found my voice, and no one could take that from me. The confrontation wasn't over, not yet. The family had left, but the silence in my apartment was thick with the aftermath. I sat by the window, staring at the dark sky. The weight of everything I had said, everything I had done, settled heavily on my shoulders. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I knew who it was before I even stood up. My brother. I hadn't expected him to come, but a part of me had known he would. I opened the door, and he stood there, his face flushed from the argument. "Eliza," he started, his voice softer now, I don't understand why you had to go this far, but I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I was part of this. How much I let them treat you like that." I stared at him for a moment, taking in his apology. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "It's not just about you," I said quietly. "It's about me finally standing up for myself. I've spent too many years being silenced. I can't keep living that way." He looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "I just wish you would have talked to us more. Maybe things wouldn't have gotten so bad." "No," I said, shaking my head. "It's too late for that. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. I'm asking for respect, for my boundaries, and for my peace. That's all I want now." He opened his mouth to say something more, but I stopped him with a firm glance. "I've made my decision. I'm not going back." For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with my choice. The relief flooded over me, washing away the lingering guilt. I was free. Free from the expectations. Free from the manipulation. The door clicked shut behind me as my brother left, but I didn't feel alone. For the first time, I felt stronger than I ever had before. I had claimed my power, and no one could take it away from me. The morning light filtered through the curtains of my apartment, casting long, soft shadows across the room. It felt like the calm before a storm, the quiet after the upheaval of the past few days. I stood by the window, staring out at the city below, my thoughts swirling like the wind outside. My phone buzzed again, the familiar tone of my brother's message lighting up the screen. I had learned to ignore the constant notifications, but today, it felt heavier. "Please, Eliza, come back. This is tearing us apart. We can work this out. Just come home." The words were a plea, but there was an underlying sense of guilt. His desperation rang through the screen, but the only thing that settled in my chest was the firm realization that I couldn't go back. I looked around the apartment, the place that finally felt like mine. It was empty, yet full. Full of freedom, yes, but empty of the family I'd always longed to feel accepted by. The weight of it all was a constant pull. I missed them, but at the same time, I knew what they offered was never the love I had hoped for. I had made my decision. The hardest decision I'd ever make. But it was the right one. I couldn't go back. "I've made the hardest decision of my life, but it's the right one," I whispered to myself. The words echoed in the empty space. This was my life now. I couldn't keep living in a place where I was invisible, where my voice meant nothing. I had to break free. As much as it hurt, this was the only way I could begin to heal. My freedom came at a cost, but that cost was worth it. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I could no longer live with the constant weight of their expectations, their manipulations. The next day was filled with an endless stream of buzzing phones, calls from my brother, voicemails from my father, each one asking for answers, for reasons. It was a relentless cycle of guilt that gnawed at me. I didn't pick up. I didn't respond. The doubts crept in, though. Am I making a mistake? Will I regret this? The uncertainty was suffocating. But then I would remind myself, the decision I'd made was mine. They didn't get to dictate my happiness anymore. I couldn't let their manipulations control me. I can't let fear control me anymore. I deserve peace, I said it aloud, to myself. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. The love I had longed for from them would never come. They couldn't give me what I needed. It was time to stop waiting. I placed my phone face down, resisting the temptation to check for new messages. It wasn't a matter of being cold, It was a matter of survival. They would never understand. But I had to live for myself now, not for them. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as I walked through the park. The chill of the evening air hid my skin, a welcome contrast to the warmth of the sun that had been hanging over the city. I had always come here to clear my head, to think. But today, it felt different. Today, I wasn't just clearing my head. I was preparing for the next step. The real journey. As I walked, a familiar face caught my eye. It was an old friend from high school, someone I hadn't seen in years. "Eliza?" she said, her voice tentative, but full of warmth. "Is that really you?" I stopped, and a smile broke through the heavy weight on my face. "Hey, Kitty. It's been a long time." We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on life, but somewhere between the laughs and the casual conversation, I found myself opening up to her. I told her about everything. My family, the decisions I'd made, the consequences. "You've always been strong, Eliza," she said, her eyes filled with sincerity. "But it sounds like you've lost yourself in all of this." It was a moment of clarity. She was right. I had lost myself in trying to meet everyone else's expectations. In trying to make my family love me in the way I wanted, I had lost the person I used to be, the person I was proud of. "I think I've found her again," I said, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years. "I've been walking away from my past for so long, but now I'm walking towards something better." That was the moment I knew I had made the right decision. As I walked home, I picked up my phone and texted my family one final time. "I'm done. I can't keep letting you manipulate me. I've tried for years, but this is where it ends. If you can't accept me for who I am, I'm walking away for good." I hit send. Then, without hesitation, I walked away from the past. The evening had already settled in when I sat in my apartment, the last remnants of family mementos scattered across the floor. I looked around at the pictures, images of a family that had never really been mine, a family that had never truly accepted me. I had spent too many years trying to meet their impossible standards, but I was finally free. As I packed away the last of the photos, my phone rang. I glanced at it. It was my mother. I let it ring. She left a message. "Why are you doing this, Eliza? Why are you throwing everything away? You don't have to do this. Just come home." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The decision had already been made. I had spent so many years holding on to them, but I needed to let go. "I'll always love them, but they can't be part of my life anymore," I whispered to myself, a bitter, yet freeing truth. This was the only way forward. A week passed, and I found myself in a small cafe, reading a book on personal growth. I was no longer worried about what my family thought of me. I had taken my first steps into the world, without the weight of their expectations. I was still figuring things out, but I was finally starting to live for me. As I read, a woman at the next table caught my eye. She smiled at me as she sipped her coffee, and we struck up a conversation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to someone who saw me, not as the daughter, the sister, the fixer, but as me. "I've always wanted to do something like this," she said. "It's not too late, right?" I smiled, feeling something stir within me. "No, it's never too late." And as I walked out of that cafe, I realized it was true. It wasn't too late for me to become who I was meant to be. The weight of the decision settled heavily on my shoulders as I sat alone in my apartment. The night after the confrontation with my family, the silence felt deafening. I had sent my final message to them, cutting all ties, but the absence of their response hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I stared at my phone, wondering if there would ever be another message. But there wouldn't be. The truth was clear, I had made my choice, and there was no going back. I picked up the letter from my mother, the one that had arrived earlier in the day. Her handwriting was delicate, each word seeming to plead for reconciliation. But I didn't need to read it. The pain in my chest reminded me of everything I had endured to get to this point. I didn't need more words from them. I needed peace. Without a second thought, I ripped the letter in half, the sound of it tearing filling the silence. "This is it," I thought to myself. "No more chances with them." A sense of finality washed over me. As much as I loved them, they had never truly loved me the way I needed. But I had myself now. I had my future. It was time to stop looking back, to stop wondering if I was wrong. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my brother. I let it ring unanswered. This was my life now. I was moving forward, and nothing would hold me back. A few days passed, and the silence grew louder. I avoided my phone, knowing it would only drag me back into the web of guilt they had spun around me. But it wasn't easy. The doubt crept in, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Had I made the right choice? Was I being too harsh? The question circled in my mind like a never-ending loop. Then, one evening, I picked up my phone. Hesitantly, I unlocked it and saw the message from my brother. This time, it wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It wasn't a demand for an apology. It was a message of understanding, though it still carried the weight of hurt. I don't agree with what you're doing, but I get it. I just wish things were different, the message read. My heart ached. Part of me wanted to respond, to explain everything, to make him understand. But another part of me knew that no amount of explaining would change anything. They had never understood me, and I couldn't keep waiting for them to. I read his message again, feeling the pain in his words, but also a sense of relief. He might never fully understand, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I'm allowed to move on, I whispered to myself. I don't need their approval. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't have to answer him. I didn't have to carry the burden of their expectations anymore. A week later, I found myself packing up my apartment, sorting through old mementos and family photos that had once meant everything to me. The past felt like a heavy weight that I needed to lift off my shoulders. I came across a framed photo of my parents. For a moment, I hesitated. But as I looked at their faces, I didn't feel sadness. I felt closure. They were a part of my past, but they didn't define me anymore. I'm done living in the shadow of their expectations, I said aloud, my voice steady. I'm living for me now. Packing up the last of the family items was cathartic. It was the final step in letting go of the person I had been, the person who constantly tried to please them, the person who shrank in their presence, the person who never felt good enough. That person was gone. The future stretched out in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. A month had passed since I cut ties with my family, and the loneliness still lingered, but it was different now. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that weighed me down with guilt or doubt. It was the kind of loneliness that left room for growth, for new connections, for possibility. One afternoon, I went to the park to clear my mind. It had become my place of peace, my place of reflection. As I sat on a bench, my thoughts wandering, I noticed someone walking toward me. It was a woman about my age, carrying a sketchbook and a pencil. She sat down next to me, and we struck up a conversation. We quickly discovered that we shared a love for art and personal growth. She had recently gone through her own struggles with family and was working on rebuilding her life, just like I was. Her words were comforting, and in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, someone who truly understood me. We talked for hours, and as the sun began to set, I realized something important. The family I had lost was never the one I needed to build my future around. I could create my own family now, one built on love, mutual respect, and understanding. I'm not alone anymore, I said to her, feeling a warmth spread through me. I can build the life I want. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The year passed in a blur. I had settled into my new apartment, surrounded by new friends, new opportunities, and new beginnings. I had let go of the past and embraced the future with open arms. Then, one day, I received a letter. It was from my mother. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her in months. I opened the letter slowly, almost afraid of what it would say. It was filled with regret, sorrow, and a quiet apology. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. I had been angry for so long, but as I read her words, I realized that while they would never be perfect, they were still my parents. I forgive them, I whispered, the words feeling like a weight lifting from my chest. Not for their sake, but for mine. I wasn't ready to open the door back to them, not yet. But I had learned to forgive. And for the first time, I felt the freedom that came with it. I am not defined by my past, I said, standing at the window of my new apartment, looking out at the world below. I am defined by the choices I make today. And as I looked toward the horizon, I knew that the past was truly behind me. I was moving forward,